The main event in pro wrestling feels important again these days. This is good. While it's not the same as it was, you always want your last match to deliver big. Look at boxing and MMA, they still have this approach for a reason. WWE has been around so long sometimes they do go crazy though, so I am Simon Miller, thank you for joining me. And let's take a walk down memory lane. Number 10, Lawrence Taylor versus Bam Bam Bigelow at WrestleMania 11. Well, what a world we live in. WWE has always been keen on outside athletes and celebrities competing, and at WrestleMania they went all the way with that. NFL player Lawrence Taylor was happy to come in, and with the promise of fame and wealth down the line, Bam Bam Bigelow was happy to be the opponent. Even then, I don't think anybody thought they would main event the show, especially as Diesel versus Shawn Michaels for the WWF title was on the card. Those guys must have been livid. It was also the first time since Mania 1 where we use an outside body in such a role, and look, this is way better than it should have been, even though it wasn't great. Fair play to that Bigelow though. That dude held it together. The strangest part is Taylor won, and then was never seen again. And of course, Bam Bam never got his promised push afterwards. So we've all learnt a lesson there. Don't trust people in wrestling. Number 9, Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Kevin Owens at WrestleMania 38. So this was one of the best days of my life. And I mean that. I had always wanted to be in the crowd for a Steve Austin pop, and I got this during night 1 of WrestleMania 38 when the Rattlesnake took on Kevin Owens. It was wonderful. For starters, I also love KO, so this was a treat, and Austin wound back the clock. If he was going to work a match, he was going to go 100%. Health and age be damned. You could just tell they were having the best time too, but let's be honest. Even after WrestleMania 37, if I had told you this was going to happen 12 months later, you would have laughed in my face. Rightfully so. I still go back and watch it today because it feels like such a fever dream, and really it's all I want from pro wrestling. But if you are going to talk about crazy main events, one of the most successful wrestlers of all time coming back from nowhere, well, it ranks right up there. Number 8, Randy Orton versus Bray Wyatt at No Mercy 2016. Now, there is nothing wrong with this at first glance. Randy Orton was a star, Bray Wyatt was the best. Let them fight. There was a story here too, as Wyatt had tried to corrupt Orton only for Randy to betray Bray, which also led to Luke Harper returning. Great. Works for me. The reason people were confused is due to the other matches on the card. Dean Ambrose versus John Cena versus AJ Styles was happening for the WWE title, but we put that on first. Even the IC Championship match between Dolph Ziggler and The Miz felt big. I mean, Dolphy Boy had put his career on the line. It just meant when Randy and Bray were out here, people didn't really know why. Nobody explained it. It's not a massive problem because, again, they were also stars. But really, when you broke it right down, it didn't make too much sense. Number 7, DX versus the Spirit Squad at Vengeance 2006. Which is the same for this one too, although you can kind of figure it out. Given who was involved, they decided the D-Generation X versus McMahon's feud was more important than anything else in the company, so boom. We ignored the rest and just stuck the Triple H and Shawn Michaels match in the main event at Vengeance. The real issue was, this would have been better somewhere else on the card. I actually thought this was fun enough, although a little bit immature, but hey, that's okay. Just use it as some levity on the pay-per-view that did feature some of the biggest stars. Fans rejected it because of how it was set up, and the Spirit Squad at the same time just weren't ready. I quite liked the gimmick, but even then, you gotta pick and choose wisely. It was also a 5-on-2 handicap match, and DX still whooped their asses, meaning John Cena versus Sabu, Kurt Angle versus Randy Orton, and a WWE title fight between Edge and RVD all had to come before this. It don't look great. The Spirit Squad were basically done after this too, with Triple H and HBK literally sending them back to OVW because they weren't good enough. And to summarize this, what I would say was, this weren't the best time for WWE. Number 6, Steve Austin, Owen Hart, Cactus Jack, and Chainsaw Charlie versus Triple H, the New Age Outlaws, and Savio Vega at In Your House, No Way Out of Texas. I mean, it's like we just drew these names from a hat. Let's throw everybody in there. Amazingly, Savio Vega was a last-minute addition to this, and you can guess who was meant to be there. This was a month before WrestleMania 14, so Shawn Michaels was meant to be leading the other team. Then he hurt his back at the Royal Rumble, so it was all change. Now, Savio rules, but he stood out here because the heels were all associated with DX, whereas Vega headed up Los Boricuas. So we just sold it that he really hated the Rattlesnake. You could have also used Chyna here, who was going to start mixing it up with the men anyway. It sort of sums up the WWF in 1998. It was a little all over the place. It would actually be Stone Cold's WWF title win that finally set them on a new proper course. Know of any other WWE main events that were playing crazy? Make sure you let us know in the comments below before you interact with this video by liking, subscribing, and whatever the other thing is. Number 5, The Rock and John Cena versus The Miz and R-Truth at Survivor Series 2011. Well, this one made no sense. The whole point of The Rock and John Cena fighting at WrestleMania 28 was because they hated each other. It's why their promos were so heated, and yet come November they teamed up. What? Of course it was done as we had a year's build, so needed to fill in the gaps, plus I'm sure Rocky wanted some in-ring time. That's only ever gonna help. Even then, I don't think anyone predicted the awesome Truth would be the opponents, but hey, Miz had been directly tied to this since WrestleMania 37, and he had been messing with Cena for months. At least we kept him in the loop, given sometimes he was made out to be the third wheel. As mean as it does sound, the A-lister and Truth were also disposable, so Cena and The Rock could knock them around, and it didn't matter. The whole point of this was that they could focus on the beef between each other. The worst part was the Great One was going to join forces with Zack Ryder originally before the heels took him out, so all of this was bizarre. But hey, we did have a 2012 main event to sort out, so whatever we gotta do. Number 4, John Cena versus R-Truth at Capital Punishment 2011. At least with the knowledge of the last entry, we can figure this one out. If R-Truth was in this position anyway, why not use him? I'm pretty sure it was also the only time Truth went for the WWE title on a televised broadcast, which is ridiculous, and beating John Cena was his goal. As ever, R was wonderful as he turned heel before this after seeing imaginary children, but do not get it wrong. He turned up the seriousness too, and almost called back to the character he played in TNA. The issue was WWE kind of rushed this, so having it as a pay-per-view main event was just a little bit weird. This was also when we had Raw and SmackDown monthly big main events, so I kind of think the takeaway here was, well, we may as well. Probably should have pushed R-Truth properly. That dude would have been totally fine. Number 3, John Cena versus John Lauritas at Over the Limit 2012. Whereas this one was just bad. Really, really bad. You have to imagine it was just to make Vince McMahon laugh, and look, if you want to do this somewhere on a pay-per-view, fine. It's stupid, but you do you. As a main event though, no wonder people stopped watching. This was also Cena's first feud after he lost to The Rock at WrestleMania 28, so talk about a waste. The heat was also on Lauritas too, as it was a no-Q match with his general managership on the line. I mean, that's not a word, but I still hate it. It also meant he won when the Big Show arrived to knock out Cena. And let's remind ourselves, this closed the show when CM Punk was the WWE champion. So no wonder he got fed up with the WWE all the way back then. It was really dumb. Still kind of makes me mad. Number 2, the 2020 Money in the Bank ladder matches. So lockdown was a weird time. It was sort of good that WWE continued as we did have a distraction, but they also did a lot of odd things, such as this. Because if we are taking the Money in the Bank match 2020 seriously, Baron Corbin killed 2 people as he threw Rey Mysterio and Aleister Black off a building, plus the women's scramble was happening at the same time. We also had cameos from Paul Heyman, Brother Love, Doink the Clown, and Vince McMahon, plus some of these cuts. At one point, we saw Stephanie McMahon. This was very clearly shot at a different time. Oscar and Otis were also the winners, which very much felt like a window into the current time period. You can actually hear Otis talk about this on Chris Van Vliet's podcast. Even he was a bit like, I don't know what's happening. And look, it was fine having this as the main event because it was essentially a cinematic match. But when you watch it today, well, it's kind of like we all did some drugs. Number 1, Braun Strowman versus Bray Wyatt at Extreme Rules 2020. In the horror show, I suppose we can call this the end of the cinematic pandemic run. And again, we just talked about those drugs. They make a return. Now, I do totally understand that WWE had to do something, but this one was just strange. I actually did appreciate the creativity put into it, but as a main event, well, I'm not sure it clicked, and I've never felt the need to watch it since. Braun was the Universal Champion though, and Wyatt was his old mentor, so this could have been really good. The emotion was there, but everything else was just bizarre. They eventually went and fought in a swamp where Bray kind of killed Strowman and got attacked by a bunch of ghosts. There was also a woman holding a snake. I don't know, you tell me. The ending was more death as Wyatt dragged his old friend into the water, and yep, that was that. So this really was just a mini movie, but if you've never watched wrestling before, it's just so far removed. So given that it was meant to be nutty, I suppose that it's fine it was nutty, you should go nuts. But it doesn't make it any easier to explain, and if you do try and tell somebody this was a main event on a WWE pay-per-view, well, they'll probably walk off scratching their head.